So we have been running our vlog channel now. We've got a few videos that we've uploaded in which we are showcasing our lifestyle on 2 different continents, in the UK and here in Canada. And as a result, some of you have been curious and asking some questions about how do we actually make that work? How do we have homes in 2 different places? What have we done to make that a possibility? And so we thought that we would do this video to get into the details of that and to describe how we are actually making this happen in terms of like having homes on 2 different places.
Right.
Not being nomadic, we are not travelers, we're not digital nomads where we just kind of live wherever. We specifically have homes in 2 different places, and how are we actually executing on that?
And if you don't have kids, a lot of the challenges we'll talk about will be a lot easier for you. For those of you who do have children and are wondering how we make it work or trying to make it work, we'll go over that as well as the financial aspects. Today we'll talk about that too.
Yeah, so we're gonna get into the why, the how, the challenges. We're gonna go out for a walk, so we'll bring you along with us and we'll get into some of those details. So we wanted to start by really explaining why we wanted to start doing this. And really, I think it started with a problem. We've traveled to a lot of different places in our lifetime together, but we found that there wasn't really one place that we wanted to call home. To be exclusively like, this is our one and only home, this is where we are all the time. Because we get a little bit bored, I think, and we do like to see new things and try new things. But at the same time, I really like the idea of home. It's one of my favorite things about traveling is actually coming home. We want to have a home, but could we pick just one place to have home? It's kind of tricky to do that.
We tried a few different things throughout the years, numerous sabbaticals where we rented places overseas. And really a lot of this started over 20 years ago when I took a teaching position in the UK and we stayed in Surrey for a year and absolutely loved it. One of the things we loved about it was the launching off point of London to really anywhere. Every time I had a week off, which was frequent in the British school system, we were traveling all over Europe at the time. Sabbaticals, what it left us wanting is every time we came back from a sabbatical, we were like, we want to go back again. But we didn't want to give up Canada either because there are a lot of things that we really like about Canada that the UK didn't satisfy for. So it really was a situation where we wanted to try and figure out how we could get the best of both worlds.
We wanted to kind of capture that feeling of enjoying 2 countries to live in. The UK has always been a big pull for me. That's where all of my family is from. My childhood trips were always going to the UK to visit family. Then of course we have a strong connection to Canada because this is where both Ken and I grew up. We liked the idea of raising our kids here to a certain degree in Canada, having them go to Canadian schools. If this is something that you're thinking about, it's really important to look at what is important to you, what your priorities are, where are the places in the world that you feel a strong pull to, and where do you want to not just visit, but really like to experience it on a deeper way as a resident, somebody who lives there. Figure out your why, what is your motivation, what are your goals, and then step 2 is to really to hone in on and identify the countries or the places or the cities that you would actually want to call home.
And go back to regularly.
Yeah. We wanted to just get into a little bit more of the how, like the nuts and bolts of how we actually got started on putting this all together.
For anyone choosing this sort of thing, you'll want to be very intentional about why you're choosing that second country and what it offers different from the first. And for us, the difference were quite vast because we are on the West Coast and the West Coast offers a lot, particularly around recreation. There's kayaking, skiing's a big thing here, mountain biking, climbing, lots of outdoor stuff. But what we found there was a lack of was some of the more cultural things. We really enjoy going to, like in London, the West End, going to shows. We don't really have much of that on the West Coast here, so we missed out on that. London obviously has fantastic museums. It's a much more vibrant scene, so it was a very different experience, and we do enjoy that because again, it really speaks to the variety of the life that you have is what are you getting out of that life, and we wanted both ends of that spectrum.
Not only is there a lot of awesome cultural things to do in London itself, what we also love about being over there in Europe is that it's such an easy jumping off point to a lot of other European locations to travel. Like last year, we went on just a short trip to Vienna at Christmas time for the Christmas market. We went to Greece.
And these are pretty inexpensive, quick flights. By comparison, where we are, it's very expensive in Canada to fly, and the distances are quite great. As a family of 4, we can fly 4 of us to somewhere like Barcelona for what it costs one of us to fly to, say, Toronto from the West Coast. To have Europe open up to us like that when we're flying out of London is a real novelty for us.
So by making the choice of North American base and a European base, we really felt like we got the best of both worlds. So obviously this all sounds pretty good and sounds like living the dream, right? Choosing 2 different countries, 2 different places to live in. But clearly the big problem that comes up for most people, and that came up for us too, is what do you do about work? So we had to do a lot of research and a lot of thinking about all the different options, like all the different possibilities, ways that people can make this happen. And it turns out that there are actually a lot of different ways, especially now more than ever, that people can make this work and can have something that gives them flexibility so that they can still be earning income but can live wherever they want. So you can do things like online consulting, freelancing, investments, YouTube, or like any of those sort of creative kinds of pursuits, being a social media manager. Like there's lots of different things that people can actually do if you're willing to kind of think outside the box.
We'll get into leveraging the properties that you buy later on in this video, but this is really more about that ability to earn a living while you are living bicontinentally.
At the time when we started thinking about how we could execute on this plan of ours, I was working in a clinic full-time, Ken was working in the bank full-time. You know, it was a process for sure to gradually start to liberate ourselves from those geographically limited jobs. When I was able to make the jump into fully running my business online, that's when I became completely location independent and was just running my company online, which meant that I could, of course, do it from wherever.
Mine was a little bit different, working for a bank. Now, a bank had actually been quite accommodating and let us do a couple summers. I was able to get pretty generous vacation time. But while I was at the bank, I was also teaching part-time. And so what I did is ramped up my teaching so that when we're here in Canada, I'm teaching in class, lecturing. And when we are overseas, I work remotely. I do online learning. So that has enabled me to be not as flexible as Kim, but working within the parameters of our life.
The next step after you get all of that set up, which can admittedly take some time, right? Like it does take an investment of time and a commitment to make it work. But once you have figured out those pieces, then some fun stuff comes into play, like travel logistics and setting up your homes. So we're gonna talk about that stuff next. We're gonna go and find somewhere to have tea, and we'll talk to you about the next part then. Once you have figured out where you're going to be, like what are the 2 places that you're going to have as your homes, and also figured out the big piece about your revenue and location independent source of income, then the next thing is to figure out some travel logistics, like what parts of the year are you actually going to be in each place, and consider the seasons, holidays, all of those kinds of pieces need to get taken into consideration. Also, it's good to think about loyalty programs with airlines so that you can actually maximize on that, because if you're planning to be traveling back and forth a couple of times in the year, then obviously that can make a big difference.
Yeah, and one of the things that turned out to be more important than we actually thought would be is the proximity to an airport. For us flying from Canada, there's not always direct flights places. We were actually put off from buying in Italy for that very reason, because the number of flights that would take, or trains after we land.
It's like 3 stops to
Yeah,
get there.
and I mean, by contrast, London couldn't be more convenient because we land in Heathrow.
Yeah, just a direct
and then
to
it's
London.
a 30-minute bus ride. That has not been an experience in a lot of other places where sometimes it's a 3-hour drive or a 2-hour train ride. And that's after a transcontinental flight, which is exhausting.
Exhausting. Yeah, so travel logistics, sorting that part out. And then from there, the next step is to really figure out how to, and this is something that we're actively working on now too, is to set up 2 comfortable and functional homes. And so there's a number of little tricks and things that we can share around that. One is to duplicate your essentials. So rather than like packing an enormous suitcase and all sorts of bags and trucking that onto the plane, much better we found is to just duplicate those essentials. At our place in London, we have a closet that is locked because we rent our place out when we're not there, which is another thing that we can talk about. And then also embracing minimalism is a really important
and really,
thing.
we get by just fine. Like I don't feel like I'm missing things when we only have kind of the essentials.
So those are 2 big pieces to sort out. We need to get to the bank now, which is the perfect time to talk about some of the more financial nitty-gritty of this plan. So we'll get to that next.
the financing that you might be used to in your country will not necessarily translate into your adopted country. Even simple things like getting a mortgage. For instance, if you were buying a place in France, you could very well get a mortgage even though you're not a resident there. That is not true in the UK. So we had to come up with different types of financing when purchasing in the UK, really coming with our own financing from Canada. Even that was a tremendous issue for solicitors and banks who didn't seem to understand what was going on. There's a lot of considerations in the financing, from how much money you might want to put down, what sort of rent you're going to be charging when you're not using the place, is it enough to cover? And that's before we even get into the small things like interest rates, dealing with foreign banks, even if just to have a bank account, which itself can be problematic. Not to mention if it's in a country where you don't speak the language. I don't want to deter you from going ahead and doing it, because it is a short-term pain in the butt for what is long-term gain, because once you buy it, it's yours now, and you don't have to go through with solicitors again, you don't have to go through the rigmarole with banks again. It's all taken care of. The other thing that I think it's important to understand when you're doing this is that you have to duplicate everything. Like, think about all the things you do at home bill-wise and then duplicate that. So it's 2 internet service providers, 2 electric companies, gas, little logistics like who's collecting your mail when you're not there. So it is really important to have a network to help you out on the ground when you're not there, wherever that is. So one of the first things that you're gonna have to do, even before you engage a bank or really even start looking at property, is figure out what your budget is. Now that's gonna be contingent on a couple things. One is going to be how much money you have available to you. And secondly, if you are using income off the property itself. Kim mentioned earlier that I worked in finance, so I do not want this to be taken as tax advice or even financial advice. We're just kind of relating to you what our experience has been. And it's going to vary greatly depending on what country you're in. But start with a budget and what you're comfortable with, and that will really start to guide. I mean, if your budget is $300,000 or a couple £100,000, you're not looking in Paris or Rome. You're going to be looking maybe something out in the country, which could equally be, lovely, but also comes with much bigger issues like maintenance. One of the ways in which this is made possible is leveraging the assets that you have. And I say assets because presumably if you have rare art or expensive coins, banks will take a lot of stuff as collateral to give you money. But mostly what happens is that you use your principal residence as leverage, and the banks are more than happy to give you money. Now, this is where that budget I talked about comes in really importantly, because you want to ensure that your cash flow is positive, meaning that whatever rent you are getting, it exceeds what is going out in your payments. If you're watching these videos, maybe you have your own company, and pulling money out of your company into personal can get very expensive from an income tax perspective. Most of us of our generation have been brought up to think borrowing money is really a bad idea, and I'm not suggesting you go out and run up your credit cards, but for investment, it's not a bad idea, particularly if you can have positive cash flow. But that is the key, and you'll only find that out once you kind of work a budget to determine whether or not you are making a positive cash flow from the rental income to cover whatever it is that you have leveraged. And then, of course, over time, that amount that you owe gets smaller, but the property value increases. You might say that it's a smart real estate play or an investment, not just about living Bi-Continental lifestyle, but I won't go that far, because if you want to do that, you just do that within your own country and get the same effect. Having a property overseas comes with a lot of different headaches, and we're going to get into some of what those challenges are. Maybe we'll go grab a bite to eat, and we'll talk about what some of the shortcomings are to taking on this Bi-Continental lifestyle.
So we're finished up at the bank, and now we're just having lunch at our local pub in the village. What would you say are the pros and the cons of this thing that we've been doing?
So it's obviously not all roses. This has come with challenges, it continues to come with challenges. Let me go over a few of the benefits first, just so that we're open about our situation. We actually did buy a property in France almost 20 years ago. We really enjoyed Europe, and we wanted to have kind of a holiday home, but a place we could rent. But it's fairly remote in the French countryside, and we don't really see ourselves living there. So for the sake of our vlog, we're not really considering that part of this Bi-Continental lifestyle. The reason that I bring that up is that even though we don't get to use it very often, it's rented out, it has always made life seem a little less ordinary. And particularly after having kids, and the thought of having property overseas always felt like we had something else going on. And that was a really big benefit to us. Buying property in the French countryside is not a moneymaker. The increase in value over 20 years, I'm not even sure if it has gone up, but it has brought other benefits to it. And again, it is something familiar. When we go there, we have all our stuff there. The kids are familiar with it. We know the area. We know where we want to go when we're there. And similarly with London, we've gotten to know the area very well. We know what we like, what we don't like. But you can never know everything. I mean, we've been traveling to Normandy for nearly 20 years, and there's always new stuff to discover. Our feet aren't nailed to the ground there either, so we could always sell out of Kingston if we got bored of it, but we'll see if we get there. And I guess one of the other benefits too is getting to know a place a little more intimately, right? I mean, a lot of times people say when they travel, they like to stay somewhere for at least a week to really get a sense of it. Well, working and living in an area, you do get a real sense of the culture. The downsides though, there's lots of those too. Things like getting phone calls, it could be in the middle of the night if you're on different time zones like we are.
Weird hours.
Yeah, it could be there's a problem with the plumbing. It could be there's a problem with the furnace as we had in France. It could be that you get flooding. Like all these headaches that come up with it are definitely something that kind of keeps me awake sometimes, worrying about is everything okay. One thing we didn't think about when buying in France is the maintenance. We have almost 2 acres, and those of you who know Normandy, it grows like mad. So we have to have a gardener keeping the weeds at bay, and that's not an expense we have in London. And that's one of the things that we learned from that experience is that we wanted something where we could basically turn the key, walk out the door, and not have to worry about anything.
Way fewer headaches.
A lot fewer headaches. Just keeping on top of all the bills for multiple properties and building that network and talking to people, sometimes that feels like a full-time job as well. So it is very time consuming. There are many times where we would like to just say, we'll just spend our money and rent something every summer and it would be a lot less expensive. And the truth is it probably would be less expensive and we could experience something different, but it wouldn't come with the familiarity. It wouldn't be our place in that sense of ownership that we have when we are there. Oh, the other thing too is the cost. Obviously is the big consideration. If you can afford to do both, or if you can't, what are you going to cut back on?
One of the big disadvantages also is that, of course, if we were able to commit to just having one home, then we would be able to afford a much bigger home in that one place, because we are obviously having to diversify and split up our investment. As it stands, we have kind of a more modest, smaller home in which I have to share a bathroom with 3 boys, so that is most definitely a drawback, but for me, it's absolutely worth it for lots of different reasons. I mean, financially, what we also decided is that nobody is going to pay us to all just live all the time in one big house, but by having 2 homes that we can rent out the one that we're not in at the time, then it certainly does turn into a cash flow source. And so there's definitely a financial argument to be made from that. If you can cope with having kind of a more modest, less lavish kind of lifestyle in the place where you are. And for some people that actually wouldn't be worth the trade-off, but we decided that actually would be worth the trade-off. At least that's how we're feeling right now. Maybe we'll change our minds down the road. In terms of the positives though, having the ability to experience life in 2 different places and getting to also feel at home in 2 different places, like building up a life in 2 places is really fun and creates that sense of community in 2 places. I mean, we're working on that. It is one of the challenges of moving to a new place is that we don't know very many people in the new place, like in Kingston, but we're working on doing that. I want to join some clubs and groups and things like that in the area so that we can get to know some people and build up that community. But it's fun to be able to have that as an opportunity to be able to do. So if this has been helpful, I hope that we have provided some ideas and some inspiration and maybe some tips on how you could do the same thing if you're feeling inclined or interested. And if you are somebody who actually has already done this, like maybe you're further down this than we are, then we would love to hear from you. Drop some comments down below to let us know like what are your tips or what's your story in terms of how you're actually making this happen. We'd be really interested to hear that. And if this is something that you're just thinking about doing, but you have specific questions, then let us know about that because we'll be able to address questions in future videos. Thank you for joining us. Again, thanks for watching all the way to the end, and we'll see you in our next video.